Hello, my name is Brandi Joan, and today I'm going to be showing you how to sew up one of my early spring designs with McCall's, this adorable milkmaid dress, number M8359. Before you sit down to sew your pattern, make sure that you check the pattern packet for the size ranges and all of the notions that you'll need for this project. This pattern comes with two options, but today we're going to be sewing just option B. You'll need fabric, lining, one 14-inch zipper, 3/8 elastic, thread of your choice, single fold bias tape, and 1/4-inch featherweight boning. Once you've gathered all of your supplies, you can start cutting out your pattern pieces, which will include the bra front that you're going to cut 2 main fabric of, the drawstring, cut 2, the bodice front, cut 2 on the fold, 1 fabric and 1 lining, the bodice side front, cut 2 fabric and 2 lining, the bodice back, cut 2 fabric and 2 lining, the sleeve, cut 2, the elastic guide for the shoulder, cut 2, the elastic guide for the sleeve, cut 2, the skirt right front, cut 1, skirt left front, cut 1, and the skirt back, cut 2. And just to note, this step isn't necessary, but I am going to pre-serge all of my edges before I start sewing. So let's get to it. Pin your bodice side front sections to the edges of the bodice front. Once you have them all pinned up, sew them in place. Next, bring over your bodice back pieces and attach them to the front at the sides, and sew those in place. Now bring your bra fronts over and fold them along the fold line. Then stitch the front edge, leaving an opening below the small dot. Turn everything right side out, give it a good press, and pin the raw edges together. Then form a casing for your drawstring by stitching 5/8 below the fold. Baste the raw edges together and gather the basted edges from notch to notch. Once you've gathered both of your bust cups, it's time to set those aside and bring over your drawstrings. Turn one of the ends in 3/8 of an inch towards the wrong side of the fabric. Then, with the right sides together, fold the drawstring in half lengthwise, pin them together, and then sew them in place using a 3/8 seam allowance, keeping both of the ends open. Trim the seam allowance and turn the straps right side out. One end of your strap will still be open but look closed like this, while the other still has a raw edge. Now, insert the drawstring through the casings, making sure all of the raw edges are even, and baste them in place. Next, pin the bra fronts to the bodice front, matching the center front and all of the symbols. Clip the bodice when necessary, adjust the gathers, and baste in place. Be sure to check that the little triangle in the center of the bust looks accurate, because that is important to making the dress look good. Next, reinforce the corners of the sleeve, pivoting at the small dots. Bring your bias tape over, open out one folded edge of the bias tape, press out the crease and reshape the tape to match the curve of the edge by pressing lightly. With the right sides together, pin the bias tape to the upper edge of the sleeve between the notches. Placing the crease along the 3/8 seam line, turning in the ends, stitch along the crease on the tape. Trim the seam allowance to be even with the bias tape. Turn the bias tape to the inside along the seam, give it a good press, and finally, to form the casing, stitch the lower edge closed. Now bring your elastic guide for the shoulder over and cut a piece of your 3/8 elastic. Insert the elastic through the casing, extending the ends 5/8 beyond the casing. Then sew it in place and trim the excess elastic. Now, the instructions say to stitch the sleeve seam here, but I found it really difficult to get the elastic through the sleeve casing, so we're going to hem the lower edge of the sleeve first by turning it up 3/4 of an inch and then turning it up again by 1/4 of an inch and sewing that in place. Now we're going to insert the elastic into the casing, leaving the elastic hanging out of the edge, so when we stitch the sleeve closed, we make sure to catch all of the elastic. Once you have both of your sleeves sewn up, it's time to pin them to the armhole edge, matching the seams, notches, and symbols, then baste them in place. Set that aside for later and bring your lining pieces over. First, we're going to stitch the bodice front lining sections to the side edges of the bodice front lining, the same way we did with the main fabric. Then press the seams towards the center. Now stitch the bodice back lining sections to the bodice front lining at the sides the same way we did the main fabric again, but this time press the seam allowance towards the back. Now bring your boning over and use the bodice to measure the length that you need to cut each piece. Remove the boning from the casing, trim the edges, and round out the corners so it's more comfortable to wear and won't cut your fabric. Set those aside and sew the boning channels into your fabric by stitching 1/8 away from the edge on either side. Then turn in the lower seam allowance of the lining. Now pin your skirt right front to your skirt left front at the front edge, leaving an opening below the large dot, and then sew it in place. Now pin your skirt back sections to the skirt front at the sides. Sew those in place. And instead of attaching the skirt to the bodice, we're actually going to attach the lining first, because that's another way that I did find is a lot easier to make this dress. So with the right sides together, pin the lining to the top, making sure that your sleeves and your bra fronts are tucked in between the lining and the main fabric. Then sew all the way around that edge, leaving about 5/8 free on both ends. Turn everything right side out and understitch that as far as you can go. Now we're going to attach the skirt to the bodice just to the main fabric, making sure that we match all of the side seams, the center seam, and the notches. Now we're going to install the zipper. On the outside, pin the zipper to the left back opening edge. Make sure the zipper is face down in the seam allowance, placing the zipper tape 1/4 down from the upper edge of the fabric and the zipper teeth on the seam line. Pin that in place and sew it down. And make sure that you've switched to your zipper foot when sewing the zipper. Check that the zipper still closes, and pin the remaining zipper tape to the right back opening edge, placing the zipper teeth on the seam line. Then sew that in place. Now to close the space below the zipper, we're going to close the zipper, slide the zipper foot to the left, pin the back sections together below the zipper, and then starting a little bit before the zipper end, sew all the way down to the hem. Now turn the bodice lining to the inside, turning in the center back edges to clear the zipper teeth. Press and slip stitch the center back edges to the zipper tape and lower the pressed edge over the waist seam. Now we're going to double fold hem the lower edge of the dress. If the hem is giving you some trouble, it will help to stitch 1/4 inch away from the lower edge of the dress using a long machine stitch. Turn up 5/8 of an inch, turning in 1/4 of an inch on the raw edge, and pull the thread to ease in the fullness. Finally, the last step, we're going to narrow hem the front slit opening at the skirt, using a 5/8 seam allowance, tapering to nothing above the large dot at the top of the slit, pivot across the seam 1/4 inch above the large dot when stitching, and then back down.
And there you have it, your very own Milkmaid dress is complete. If you enjoyed this tutorial, you might enjoy my other early spring design,
number M8360. You can find that linked down in the description. And if you do post your final product on social media, please don't forget to tag me because I would love to see it. Brandi Joan is where you can find me across all social platforms. And that's pretty much it. So thanks for coming. I'll see you next time.